special guest on the show this afternoon. He's the lead singer in Bastille, who released their debut album, Bad Blood, in 2013, and have just released a new album called Bastille Presents Ampersand. Dan Smith is with me here on Six Music. Hi, Dan.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Dan, is this a new Bastille album?
No, it's not really. We've decided to sort of take a year or so away from touring because we've done it pretty relentlessly for 10 plus years. And so this is kind of a project of mine that I've been sort of working on for a few years. It sounds very different. Sort of thematically, it's quite different as well. And I guess it's a sort of passion project of sorts. But I've really loved making it. It was an opportunity to do something that sounds different. I think hopefully to sort of show my songwriting in a different way and do something really just for me with zero expectations, and an opportunity to work with some amazing musicians and artists and creatives and write about people that I think are really fascinating, and sort of explore what life would have been like in their shoes, or to ask them questions through these songs. It's been just a really lovely thing to be part of.
Why is it called Ampersand?
So I often write songs about other people, or anything in the Bastille, in our songs, from like through to Icarus and Laura Palmer, which is about someone from Twin Peaks. I guess as a songwriter, it's always been something that a sort of way into writing that I've found fascinating, and I almost find it easier to write about things in my life, stories. And I started a few years ago I wrote this song called Leonard and Marianne, about Leonard Cohen and Marianne Ilhen, one of his friends and partners and muses. And then I also had a song called Bonnie and Clyde, and I guess I saw them written down and saw the ampersand in the middle and thought, I've always written story songs, even if I don't necessarily shout about it, but because why would you? But to sort of formalise it for this album, to give myself a project to explore these people, and then immediately slightly worried that it would be falling down the trap of kind of famous 20th century couples. So to people and their ideas. And then I started looking at, a whole load of people that I knew and wanted to find out more about why we remember them as we do. If we remember them wrongly or correctly, what life would have been like at the time, the sort of challenges they faced, why they pushed against society and did the things they did. And then I started working with this academic called Emma Nagoose, who she writes and produces a podcast and radio show called You're Dead to Me. She's really funny. She's from Newcastle. She's insanely clever and smart and has just a really fantastic perspective on the world. And I kind of went to her and was like, I think I'm falling down a trap of just writing about people I know really well, and I want to sort of find out a bit more, and can you lend me your expertise? So she directed me towards a whole load of different people. There's this Chinese pirate called Cheng Yi Sao, who was the most successful pirate ever. Her piracy empire that she led was so massive and dominant that it kind of rivaled the Chinese state, and yet she was always known as Cheng Yi Sao, which is wife of Cheng Yi. Patriarchy. So it's I don't know, that was really interesting. And then there's this other character called Julie Daubigné, who was a French opera singer and sword fighter who broke out one of her girlfriends from a nunnery by burning it down. And these people who are are known to some, but not maybe in mainstream popular culture or kind of historical. It was really interesting finding out about them and going down a bit of a rabbit hole of research, and trying to then the slightly daunting task of trying to like absorb all of that and write a song, either as a question to them or imagining a moment in their lives, a moment in their shoes.
Deal with and speak to in the music that you've written for this album. How have you made it flow?
I think sonically, perhaps. I think a thing with history and a thing with people that we know and maybe misremember or remember as a certain things, it's so easy to sort of sandblast any nuance or humanity off of a lot of these people and just remember them for the thing they were famous for, or a kind of cartoonish, kind of cliche version of who they are. And that's something I'm really interested in. So I guess I tried to find the angle in all of them. And then in terms of how to make it flow, we went away for 3 weeks. I finished the songs at the end of last year and made a plan with a bunch of friends and musicians, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't. And the idea was to make this totally differently to how I've ever made music before, in the tradition that most other people make music. So we went 17 songs to make and a big old whiteboard. I'm a massive nerd, so we had, board of pictures of all of these people so that everyone who was part of it sort of knew who they were, and then a big board of things to tick off, and we had 3 weeks to do 17 songs, which is no mean feat, but I wanted it to be real, and lots of live takes in the room. You can hear the rain on the roof in some songs, you can hear the creak of piano stools and people breathing and fingers on guitar strings, all the things you should and want to. Like, I wanted to nod to the music that I love, both from the stuff my parents played in the house growing up, like Simon and Garfunkel and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and a whole host of other artists in that vein, and then also the stuff I loved growing up, like Sufjan Stevens, Anoni, Regina Spektor, countless other artists, Damien Rice, people who made music with a kind of distinct voice and something to say, and a kind of openness and honesty, but a rawness as well. So yeah, I think having done it all in 3 weeks sort of pulls it together to me. And restraint. I think, I've always made music on a laptop in my bedroom, and it's always been for me about escapism and imagination and kind of imagining myself into these different times or places or worlds. So, it has in the past had a tendency towards bombast, and I think that's not necessarily the music I listen to all the time. It's definitely not the album I wanted to make now. So it was about restraint. It was about moving the songs down in keys, so they're sort of easier to sing and softer, and adding lots and then pulling it all away.
I don't know if I've ever heard an artist talk with such passion about an album.
I'm obviously not an authority whatsoever on any of these people. I'm just a sort of interested idiot. So Emma, who I mentioned earlier, she podcast with me to speak about these people. It's called Muse, and we kind of explore their lives and look at why they're remembered or not.
What have been your most surprising discoveries about the characters and themes that you've explored?
That's such a good question. I guess it was the people I didn't know about. I think even Paradise Lost, we were talking about the idea that we sort of all kind of have an impression of what that story is. It's got like biblical literacy, and it's obviously had such huge echoes through sort of society and culture, and all the different versions of society and all the different cultures that have existed, and it's so interesting to trace that back to actually what the story is, and then the way that both with that and with a lot of the Greek myths, that sort of the times we live in really inform what version of that story is told. And it's actually more of a mirror back on where we're at the moment, because it's like, well, is this about control? Is it about like men being in power? Like, what are all the reasons for the story being told in that way? Is it like a really Christianly moral time? So they've sort of imposed these like moralistic perspectives on the myths. I don't know, I guess that was kind of really interesting to me.
I want to play something from the album now. What should it be, Dan?
Well, seeing as I just talked about it, do you want to play Even Paradise Lost?
All right. Here it is. And Dan, let's talk some more after this. Bastille presents Ampersand, and Dan is with me here on Six Music this afternoon. Dan, is this going to be influential in terms of what you do next with Bastille?
Good question. I don't know. I'm sort of just living in this at the moment. It's kind of a bit of an evolving beast. I mentioned the podcast earlier, and as part of every episode, Emma sort of at the end of it directs me towards a different person through history and culture that I may not have heard of, and I'm in the process therefore of working my way through quite a lot of homework. I've got a big stack of songs about people I didn't know that much about, or who I didn't know enough about, that I'm sort of writing at the moment. So we'll see what happens with this. I feel like I've still got quite a lot to do when it comes to this, and I'm loving it as well.
You can go back to pop music.
Yeah. I also I don't know, my definition of pop music is maybe not the same as some people, and I think to me pop just means good music. And so for me, yeah, I guess I love making music as Bastille. I love making music for this Ampersand project, the reorchestrated stuff, and writing for lots of other artists. It's brilliant. So I'm not sure. I guess I'm kind of leaving it open. I'm very, very lucky to be doing this at the moment, and the shows we did over the last couple of weeks, I sort of pulled together a group of amazing artists and songwriters who were all very happily for me up for doing this sort of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young close harmony 5-piece thing. We got to play in Manchester Cathedral last week and in Edinburgh as well, and Liverpool and Newcastle in these amazing rooms. And I think it's been it's been really creatively satisfying for me. And who knows what I'll do next.
You went to number one with your debut album, Bad Blood, in 2013. That was a huge selling album, and it featured that massive hit single that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned Pompeii. What's your relationship like with that song?
It's so interesting. For a start, I'm hugely grateful to it. I wrote that song by myself on my laptop in my bedroom, one night after work. And at the time, I think I was working at the Royal Free Hospital in London. I was like the assistant to a nurse, and I was going home and making these songs and imagining myself somewhere else, and I basically did it by myself. And then I worked on the track with Mark, our producer, and I never ever dreamed, in my mind, I'm a really pretentious music nerd. I never thought we'd live in a mainstream pop space at all. Like it was a surprise to us. It was a surprise to our label. I know because our A&R guy was incredibly blunt with us and their expectations on our album. And I don't know. Anyway, so it was bonkers. It was really insane that it did so well. And I was young, relatively young, and it's a mad, confusing experience. I think I look at sort of younger artists now who are going through that kind of a sort of a life shift, and I'm so impressed by how honest they are and how much they'll sort of call out the bizarreness of it. Because I think I always just felt so unexpectedly grateful for it. I also, never grew up kind of really wanting to be in a band. I wanted to be a film critic. But so I was quite naive. I had no expectations of what the music industry would be, what touring would be, any of that stuff. And it's still kind of processing it now. We sort of went from me not really wanting to be in videos, and at the beginning we didn't do any sort of like TV or promo. We just had these songs that people loved. It's pretty mad. And then just sort of almost followed. We almost felt like passengers following that album around the world for a couple of years. So amazing, like super grateful. And now if we play it, we've not done a proper Bastille show in a couple of years, but I would have to be the most miserable person in the entire world or psychotic to not see the happiness and joy that song brings on people's faces. It's nuts.
Do you think the rest of the band are thinking, you know what, he's enjoying what he's doing on his own so much now, we don't stand a chance of getting back together?
Oh no, well, I mean we're not even like on a hiatus. This is my weird little side quest, getting to sort of wear my geekery openly. I mean, there's I'd be lying if I said we're not working on loads of other music as well. And well, I guess we'll just see what happens. I think part of being in a band, and I don't know if any other people in musicians or bands can relate to this, but like it's a very weird, it's an odd life, and it's not one where you can really have like a plan for the future. I don't think being in a band comes with like a 5-year life plan. I've never really been able to think sort of that much further ahead than the next project or whatever that we're working on. So I'm just like, I don't want to think too much about it. I just want to kind of enjoy getting to tell these stories and sing these songs, and if people sort of find it and discover it, that's amazing.
It seems like it's all playing out pretty well.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks so much for having me.
It's so good to hear you talking in such passionate detail about what you've created with Ampersand. And not surprisingly, the intimate shows that you've been doing have all sold out. You've got more coming in Europe, in the States. Shepherd's Bush Empire in November, that's sold out too. You've mentioned the podcast, and it feels like it's been an amazing year.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel very lucky to have done it. Yeah, and this like collaborating with printmakers and artists and illustrators and filmmakers across the sort of videos and the building out of this world. Yeah, it's I guess also because we're not on tour, which normally we're just on tour the whole time, and this stuff, the sort of the album and all the creativity around it is stuff that I sort of fit in backstage rooms and on the bus, and it's getting to be home and a bit more settled and do all this has been wonderful.
Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
The album is out today. It's called Bastille Presents Ampersand, and the podcast that Dan's referenced several times is Muses, an Ampersand podcast. Dan Smith, thanks so much.
Thank you, thanks for having me.